and he can't be here, but I'm just appreciative that you're all coming out. And I first of all want to thank the Michelle Smith and Robert Smith Family Foundation for the support that allows us to convene this particular event. I want to thank the important work done by No Labels. Nancy Jacobson is here. She stepped out for a moment, but she is the founder and CEO of No Labels, and I'm sure she'll have some comments as we get into the proceedings. I want to encourage everyone to participate in this discussion. So for about 30 minutes or so, we will have a conversation among ourselves, and then we'll open up to people. Just raise your hand, I'll recognize you. And then if you wait, and then the microphone would come over. So we have 4 amazing, great panelists. First of all, I'd like to mention we have 3 former members of Congress. I served with all of them who are here. I think the senior member is Bill Frenzel. I think you're senior. No, I know you're senior. And then, you're not a senior, you're senior. Jim Jones from the neighboring state of Oklahoma, and Tom Coleman from the neighboring state of Missouri. So we have 3 kind of heartland former members here, 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat, all great guys, and I'm glad that they're here. So let me just say that we have 4 very amazing participants here. Joe Manchin, United States Senator from West Virginia, former governor of West Virginia, and I'm going to call on him first. And he's one of the leaders of the No Labels organization. He's written about it. He's got a little piece, I think, in this book that you have before you that describes the organization. Ron Christie. Ron's not our token Republican, but he happens to be the only Republican up here on the panel. And amazing background, worked on the Hill for many members, including John Kasich, the current governor of Ohio, but worked for Vice President Cheney and has his own firm and is on TV as much as about it. I see you in the middle of the night sometimes when I wake up. So,
turn it off.
Yeah, turn it off. Okay. Bill Galston worked with President Clinton, academic, wrote a piece today in the Wall Street Journal on the need for 4-year congressional terms. And I'm going to ask him to talk about that a little bit. And he's very involved intellectually in the formation of the No Labels organization, and a friend and somebody that I've known for a long time. And then Mark Penn, who I've also known for a long time with Microsoft, but one of the great pollsters, President Clinton's pollster. I used to see him, you remember those meetings up in the Yellow Oval we would have periodically. President Clinton liked polling. And he liked you, I guess, because of that. And I think you certainly gave him advice that was taken and appreciated and certainly consequential to his political success. So I'm going to start with Joe Manchin. So, you know, I've been around this place for a long time, but I'm extremely impressed with this man. He's not only former governor, current senator, very bipartisan, but he's got this kind of open quality to him, where he's not afraid to challenge anything, but do it in an agreeable way, not a disagreeable way, working across the lines. So I would ask you, from your experience as governor, particularly governor, and now as senator, why are you involved in No Labels, and how do you think it can impact the system and make it work better? And what's really wrong with the system that you need these ideas to make it work better?
Well, first of all, basically, in this atmosphere in Washington, and all of you know how toxic it can get from time to time, but you know, there's an old saying, you guilt by association, and I've never been in an atmosphere where you're guilt by conversation. And that's what I found here, and No Labels gave me a venue to not be afraid to have guilt by conversation, to have conversations, to talk across the aisle, to meet with people with different perspectives. And that was what I was looking for. So when I got here 3 years ago, I just couldn't believe that, you know, and I see it now moving in to the governor's ranks. A lot of my former colleagues are still there, and they're telling me how it's become more. And really, the Affordable Care Act did it. It kind of separated. It permeated down from Washington into the, they want us to take sides. What side are you on? And, you know, I'm on the side of America, so that's where we should be. But anyway, that's happened. So I've been very pleased by having an opportunity to meet colleagues on the other side of the Capitol. And Dan, it's a shame, you know, even my own colleagues from my own state, the 3 Congress people, we don't get to spend much time together, let alone for me to know the 432 other ones. So this has been wonderful for me to have that relationship and, you know, to make things work. I've got to know what they're thinking, and then hopefully talk to our leadership to say, listen, guys, if you go down this road, it's a road of futility. It's not going anywhere. So if our purpose is just to light up the scoreboard, if you will, to find out what side you're on and we can use it against you, then fine, keep doing what you're doing. If you really want to get something done, we should be talking to the other side. Just as early as yesterday, I talked to a group of senators saying that we should basically form the same premise that we have with no labels, a group of our congressional colleagues, our Senate colleagues, to be meeting on these, whether it's extending the unemployment benefits, minimum wage, what's going to be acceptable? Or are we going to give you something that you're just going to deep six? Are you going to take it seriously and work with it? If we can get that worked out before we give you something, then we got something that'll happen. If I just give you something because we passed it, or we did our job in the Senate, now it's all the House's fault. The House has done things, and we don't take them,
So you passed this year, in the last 3 or 4 months, you passed a farm bill, and you passed basically a budget, an appropriations bill for the next 15 or 18 months.
We got a reauthorization as far as the military.
Is that, do you think that reflects new winds coming from a fresher direction, or do you think that just is a frustration that you had?
I think that the shutdown, the calamity that we went through, backfired on everybody. The people that used it as thinking it would be position them and basically in winning more elections or in favor of the American public didn't work. So they backed off of that. They had to back off of it because I think the public is starving for this type of cooperation that we're giving with our No Labels movement, but basically are starving for leadership. And leadership is not putting your opponent in an untenable position that they can't go home and defend themselves. That's not leadership. Leadership is basically said, I need you to work with me, and I'll tell you what, I need to give you a position that when you go home you can defend yourself and I won't use it against you. Now if I can make my colleague understand that and trust me, I'll get a lot more done.
So Ron, you're a fan of No Labels. You participate in this. You're identified as a conservative, and at least in the mainstream press that might be perceived as left of center, the conservatives and the Republicans are argued as the ones who are thwarting progress in the system. How do you respond to that, and why are you in No Labels in that context?
Sure, and Mr. Secretary, first before I start, thank you, and thank you for your colleagues here at the Aspen Institute for having this forum and allowing us to have this conversation, because I think it's a key one to have. When Mark McKinnon and Nancy Jacobson first asked me, like, Ron, we really want you to be a part of this movement, we want you to be a voice, we want you to participate, I thought, are they out of their minds? I mean, I'm like to the right of Dick Cheney and like the Attila the Hun League, and like they want me to be in this No Labels outfit. But I tell you, I think very strongly about what is in this booklet that you all have, where it says in order to know where you're going, you have to agree upon the direction you're going to head. And you can't find an agreement, you can't find common ground unless you absolutely know where you're going. And how can you do that unless you don't talk to people? And I love being a facilitator. I had the honor of being Dick Cheney's Deputy Domestic Policy Advisor and then doing essentially the same thing for President Bush. And I tell you, I got more accomplished at the staff level of how can I find common ground, not with the Republican caucus, but working with Democrats and working with independents. And I think the importance of No Labels is that we don't put our ideology aside us. We're Republicans, we're Democrats, we're independents, but we care most and foremost about being American citizens and engaged in the citizenry and engaged in solving the problem. So that's why I'm part of No Labels, and I have to tell you, there are a number of people, I go on television and a lot of people say, well, wait, are you sure you want to be part of this movement? I said, not only am I sure of it, I think this is the direction, this is how we're going to break the impasse in Washington with our problem solvers and our members of putting the country first.
So there are some, I think, in both parties, but I'll speak now as saying that there are certainly some on the for perhaps improper characterization on the Tea Party side, who view that compromise and conciliation and working together is not a positive attribute. It's not something that should be considered somebody with those attributes to be a role model in the current situation, because it means defusing or dumbing down your values. How do you respond to that?
Look, you can't move forward by saying no. I'm not a big fan of the Affordable Care Act. I think it was too big. I think it was ill-conceived. But Republicans make the big mistake, and I think this is what No Labels is all about. Rather than saying no, you've got to say, this is what I'm for. You know, if you're a Republican and you don't like the Affordable Care Act, you've got to say you're for portability, you're for being able to buy insurance across state lines, you're for a whole variety of things, rather than just saying repeal. You need to be able to replace it with something. And so for No Labels, I look at that, and this is what our vision, our ideology of having a member like Senator Manchin and our 90-some-odd problem solvers of, let's not talk about what we're against, let's find what we're for. And I look back to a member of Congress that we had on the radio show, and for those of you who have Sirius XM, I encourage you to listen to our co-chair, John Huntsman, who hosts the show, along with a couple of other co-hosts, who said he's got the 80% rule. This is Mike Enzi. And Enzi said, you can always find people to agree with you 80% of the time. Don't focus on the 20, focus on the 80. And I think that's what we're trying to do as problem solvers, is focus on what we're for.
So Bill, as somebody who's covered, understood, written about politics, particularly Congress, as somebody who's worked in the inner bowels of the White House for a president who I think one can safely say reached out to about anybody he could at any time. Well, wait, I didn't mean it that way. I'm sorry, but he certainly. Well, you know, that's why I'm no longer in his cabinet or running around. But anyway, so what are the? Of course, you wrote about today. I'd be interested in hearing about why you think a 4-year term is better than what we currently have for the House. But what are the disincentives to try to make it so difficult for the system to work well? And what can we do to create the reverse, incentives for people to try to work together, to reach across the aisle? It strikes me that's one of the big issues for an individual member of Congress or a member of the Senate or a politician of any stripe. The incentives to work together to get things done are outweighed by all the other incentives that are out there in society.
Well, look, it's a tough problem, and this problem has taken a long time to develop. It's, we all know about the growth of partisan polarization, which is not something that happened yesterday or the day before. It's been happening for decades. Over the past 20 years, there's been an increased centralization of power in the congressional leadership as opposed to the committees, and that has tended to pull against the kinds of conversations that Ron and Senator Manchin were talking about. The increasing use of the primary system has tended to discipline people in both parties to toe the party line. I could go on and on. We all know there's a huge problem. The question is what to do about it. And this is where I think No Labels has been effective, certainly beyond my wildest expectations. And sort of No Labels 101, for those of you who may not be familiar with the organization, we started only a little bit more than 3 years ago officially. Started as a national grassroots citizens mobilization of hundreds of thousands of people across the country. But in September of 2012, Nancy Jacobson in the front row got the idea of actually moving from, in good Maoist fashion, from the countryside to the city, and reaching out to members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. And so we started a group called the Problem Solvers, as distinct from the Point Scorers, and the goal was to get to 75 members of this group. I'll be frank with you, I didn't think we had a prayer. And we shot by that goal in world record time. There are now, at last count, 93 members of this problem solvers group in Congress, pretty evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. And as we like to say, they range from very liberal to very conservative and everything in between. It's not a group of mushy moderation. These are strong-willed people with their own ideas, but they do not demonize the other party. These are people who, regardless of their ideological convictions, are fed up with a system that does not permit people to talk across party lines. And so they actually spent some time building trust Then they've moved on to specific legislative proposals. 9 bills on efficiency in government agreed upon last summer, introduced with bipartisan sponsorship on both sides. And they're now moving on to bigger and better things, the National Strategic Agenda, which I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about. But the remedy for mistrust begins with trust building, and then it moves on from there.
It strikes me, 2 days ago, we heard that the most senior member of the House, Congress, decided to retire, and John Dingell is kind of in the Joe Manchin school. He was there to get things done. Strong beliefs, didn't suffer fools. You didn't cross him without bearing some consequences. But at the same time, he had confidence that our political system could work, and he used it to try to do things for his people and his country.
Right.
I wonder, do you see, either one of you guys, do you see many other Joe Manchins or John Dingells in the place?
Well, I'll tell you this, Dan. I think the fact that 93 members of Congress rallied under this very unpopular, unfashionable flag, I don't know what it tells you. It tells me that there's a real hunger among elected officials to enter into a different kind of conversation and produce a different kind of politics. Otherwise, we would have gotten no take-up for our proposal. So, yeah.
I would just say very quickly that you have to be satisfied with your purpose of being here. And if you don't have a feeling of accomplishment, why be here?
Right.
So if you do the right thing and you're afraid you're going to get thrown out, that's a pretty good consolation. You have to go home. Maybe you can accomplish something there if you couldn't do it here. If there's a special club that the Senate has and I haven't been told about, why they would sell their soul to stay here, I can't find it. It makes no sense to me at all. It doesn't. So if it doesn't, they come to me one time. They said this is a party line vote, and I looked at what they wanted me to vote for. I said, it might be a party line vote, but it's sure as hell not a West Virginia vote. I can't explain this back home. If I can't explain it, I don't vote for it. Simple as that. And after about 6 months, they gave up on playing that party line stuff with me. You better have some meat to it. I got to go home to sell it. If I can't sell it, I ain't taking it home. So once they understand that, and if there's enough of us that'll do that, you can break this thing right now. But guys, it's the money. The money's killing us right now. I mean, think about it. How many senators you think or congressmen could you have gotten here today? They're all raising money. They're having fundraisers right now. They're having a luncheon, and you are expected to be there and give them money, and maybe they're smarter than me.
Well, Mark, okay, so you're probably you're one of the great pollsters in America, understanding how the American public feels about all these things. So, how do you think the American public reacts to either no labels or the ideas espoused by no labels?
Well, I think when you look at the American public, you got to start with its general mood. So, the mood of the public has been now negative about the direction of the country for a full decade. So, kids entering their 20s have never really known what it is to have an America that they thought was on the right direction. And I think that's pretty much the first time. So up to 70% of the country think the country is going in the wrong direction. Think the economy is going in the wrong direction. They think the president's going in the wrong direction. They think Congress is even worse in terms of going in the wrong direction. They're not that happy with religion, and they're moving religion. They're not getting married that much. They're not even having children as they used to. So if you take the combination of political, social, and other institutions, you would say this is about as sour a public as I've ever seen for as prolonged a period as I've ever seen it. So then second, you ask the public, do they want to see Democrats and Republicans work together under shared goals? Well, 80+% say that. Even though there are many people who are really strong Democrats or really strong Republicans, they actually see a bigger vision for the country. And the country as a whole, even if they elected a Democratic president, a Democratic Congress, or a Republican president, a Republican Congress, they actually would want to see the ideas that get enacted to be a combination of the best ideas from every side. And that comes through in every poll that we take overwhelmingly. And we took a poll on goals. And so finally, the point is, something I worked with a lot of polling through the government shutdown and the negotiations for the balanced budget and welfare reform. But it is very important, just as you said. Right now, if there's no agreement on where to go and there's no agreement on how to get there, how do you expect anybody to agree on anything?
That's right.
So you have to at least generally have an agreement on where to go, whether it's a balanced budget or 50 million jobs or securing Social Security and Medicare. And then once you agree on where you're going, then you could fight about how you get there. That at least is a manageable argument, right? So I think the great need for the National Strategic Agenda from No Labels is to plant a flag on where the country needs to go and get everybody to agree with that. And then let everyone then figure out the best ways to get there, whether they be Democrat or Republican. I think that's actually what the people support. And when you think about it, there's just no way for Congress to get together with the president until they do agree on the goals first. And that is what we saw happen in '96.
So No Labels itself, and this book, I presume, contains a list of what, those 8 or 10 goals or whatever those goals are that people can rally around?
Yeah, we actually looked at 75 different goals, but consistently, goals like securing Social Security and Medicare for 75 years, goals like creating the next 50 million jobs, goals like energy sufficiency, a lot of what I call the bread and butter goals, right? They weren't going to Mars, not high on the list on the American public right now until they have a job, health care, energy sufficiency, and Social Security and Medicare. They want the really practical but difficult jobs done first.
Mark was really disappointed that going to Mars came in dead last.
He knows that.
Right. He was really chagrined. But let's talk about these goals for a minute.
Sure.
Because they're really, because this National Strategic Agenda is organized around a handful of shared goals with 3 characteristics. Number 1, they're high-impact goals for the country. They're not peripheral. They're central to the problems that we have and what we need to do. Number 2, they are high salience for the American people. Right? These are the things that the people care about the most. And number 3, they are unifying goals across lines of partisanship and ideology. Goals that Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, liberals, moderates, and conservatives are all prepared to endorse. And frankly, when Mark started out on his poll, I thought that the group of goals that satisfied those 3 criteria at the same time, I thought that might be the null set. And boy, was I wrong, right? The things that intuitively we know need to be done, on the budget, on entitlements, on growth and jobs, on energy security, the people get that. And those are the things that rose to the top. So, I think we have a solid foundation to build on, and now the hard part starts.
Well, when George Washington and others many years ago talked about the power of factions and parties and perhaps being a destructive element in our society, is that one of the reasons why we can't seem to reach some even consensus on the goals? And is that a place that No Labels finds itself moving into, that perhaps the failure of our political parties to reach some sort of leadership position on that? Ron?
I do. I think if you look at the structure of our national political parties, in the last couple of decades, it was a very strong role that they played. It was very centralized. And I think, as Bill and Mark have articulated, the people get it. They understand what the kitchen table issues are that confront us that need to be solved. And you can find bipartisan consensus on we have got to reform our entitlement system. Medicare, Medicaid, the Social Security, it's killing us right now, and folks on both sides of the aisle aren't addressing it. We do need to be energy independent. The reliance that we have on overseas oil and geopolitical, geostrategic conflicts could really have an adverse effect on our economy. We have the means and the ability to make sure that we're energy self-sufficient. And so if you look at our general framework of what we've tried to do, of bringing that conversation with these kitchen table issues to the American people, we don't propose to have all of the answers, but we're proposing to say, again, if we don't know what direction we're going, how can we propose to have a solution to the problem that we're going to deal with?
And, yeah, go ahead.
With social media the way it is today, 24/7, anything, any subject, I mean, Mark, you know, they can change the opinion immediately and all the money can come at us. I'll give you a perfect example. I got involved in a thing called background checks. Coming from a gun state, I'm a gun owner, I'm a gun collector, I shoot, I do it all.
You've even been known to shoot legislation.
I've done that too. But the thing about it is, I'll just show you how far we're apart as a country today, and you anything, and Mark would have, and he's polled this, background checks, universal, or just limited background checks, 80 plus. Even in a gun-related state, a gun culture state, 70-75% approval. That's a slam dunk, right? No problem. Even the gun owners, people I hunt with and shoot with and do everything with, they said, Joe, once I got them to read the bill, we like your bill. Because all I said was, to people like, whether it be to Chuck Schumer or to Dianne Feinstein, I said, you know, you don't come from a gun culture, so no one's going to believe that you're going to defend their Second Amendment rights. I told Joe Biden the same thing. I've told them all. I says, if you don't come, you're not going to be able to talk to them. So myself, and I got Pat Toomey, I said, Pat, we can maybe bring some common sense to it. You got to look at me basically as a law-abiding gun owner. I'm not going to sell to a stranger or to someone I know that's not competent, that's been a criminal. As a law-abiding gun owner, we don't do those things. So if you accept me as being a law-abiding gun owner, then you should say, okay, Joe, that makes sense. But if you go to a commercial transaction, don't you think you should know? You're going to a gun show, you don't know the person. You're online, you don't know the person. Makes sense. We did it. Let me tell you the bottom line. When push come to shove, even my friends, close friends, they said, Joe, you know, we're with you no matter what. We read the bill. The bill's good. We just don't trust government. We just don't have a trust that they'll stop there, because they're seeing overreaching. They're seeing regulations and rules basically not being legislated. So we've lost that trust. How do you put that genie back in the bottle? If I can't do it on that, and I'm willing to put myself on the line, and trust me, it's not been a happy return sometimes back home. That, you know, I've had to walk into some very difficult, and I got people coming to the meetings, and it's just, it's been contentious, but we got through it, and we're fine. I'm telling you, God, they're not going to go through this. The easiest vote I can make is no. I can vote no and be in this is a happy retirement home. Hell, you won't even know if I'm alive when I'm 90, 95, because up here you can be half dead. I have no idea. So, with that being said, take the path of least resistance. You want to be in politics? You don't want to fight the social media tournament? You want all the polls, all the money coming at you? Vote no. Trust me, people are mad about everything. They don't trust government, and I can always rely back on, I could say this. I would have done that, but I can tell you, I just didn't think the agencies would not overstep their boundary. I thought they'd overreach. So I just was against it. That's the safe play. And you know what? We got more people playing safe today than being in a very positive movement for our country.
So, Mark, you and Joe have both talked about this issue of lack of trust in institutions, but we can't operate as a society like that, because we'll end up doing nothing, as Joe says. We'll be in paralysis. We'll be just no, 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 and won't build roads. We won't create any education system, do anything else. So what does your data show that we have to do to create this sense of trust, certainly over the long time? And I assume No Labels has this as part of its base agenda.
Well, no, I think, you know, trust is only going to come from progress, and even progress will be met with skepticism, right, and lack of understanding until it's trumpeted. Leadership is going to have to show the way. I mean, look, for a very long time, people have said people don't trust in the institutions, and I would have said, you know, hey, it's not so true, because people vote, people participate. You know, we're a society, when we get angry at each other, we take out negative TV ads. In most other societies, they shoot each other. You know, don't consider the ads all that bad in comparison. We have a civil society that people participate in. But we love to complain about everything. But I would say now that these are more than complaints, that there's a real disillusionment that's setting in that's beyond something I've seen before. So it is going to take leadership. It's going to take progress. It's going to take the kind of big deals. I mean, you know, I do think the other thing about Americans is Americans always believe in something until they don't, right? They change their minds. I think what you're saying about social media, they're absolutely, definitely positive, and then the minute they see something unemployment. They want to believe we've got to take the rubber band and put it back to optimism. I think you've got to look at a deal on what are these big issues coming forward, whether it's energy sufficiency or Social Security and Medicare or balance the budget. A big deal on a big issue will mean that Washington and the political leadership is taking them in the right direction. Remember, the banking crisis took out their belief in the American economy, too. So they've been disillusioned on virtually every front here. They're going to need to see some progress. The Fed supported the economy. I think that unemployment's come down. One more notch on unemployment, one big deal, a show of leadership. That's what it's going to take.
And so I'd ask you all this question. Well, No Labels is focused virtually entirely on the Congress, per se. What's the role of the White House in, you know, I mean, my dad was raised during the Depression, and he used to tell me, he said, we were about ready to jump off out of our window, except they were on the first floor, so they would have just skinned their knees. But because in Wichita we didn't have very tall buildings, like Charleston probably. But he said, and then when Franklin Roosevelt, not Roosevelt, Roosevelt got on the radio, he says, it just changed our lives. We didn't even care what he said. He just sounded good. And it kept us alive. And the other thing he said was virtually everybody was in the same boat back then. And you know, now it's not so much the case. But I'm just curious about what is the role of the White House and the president institutionally in helping to restore this sense of trust? You worked for president, so maybe you can, vice president, so you can.
President and vice president.
Yeah.
I tell you this, I look back at President Bush when we were trying to get No Child Left Behind taken care of, and he really needed Senator Kennedy to shepherd this through the Senate. I remember when the movie came out, 13 Days, he called the senator and he said, I'd like your family to come to the White House because your brother spent so much time here during a very pivotal point in American history. Why don't you come on down and bring everybody? And they came to the theater and they saw the movie, and then we, of course, got Senator Kennedy as part of our coalition to get the bill through. I say that to say that the executive has so much of a role to play here. I think what we're trying to do, what we're trying to build is an infrastructure with no labels that the president will have after the next election in 2016, when he or she sits in the Oval Office. They'll have a group of problem solvers down on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue that they know that they can work with on a bipartisan basis, that understands that we're about solving problems and finding solutions. I think that's what we're doing. And I just look, we had so much of a hassle getting the tax bill through in the administration that in a Bush administration, if we had problem solvers and we had this network, not only here in Washington, but our grassroots supporters all across the country, the folks that are calling, they are in on the website of saying, how can we be involved? I think being able to hand that off as a baton to a president coming in would be fabulous.
Yeah, Bill?
Well, Ron is absolutely right. And in addition to building the human infrastructure for a different kind of politics, we're also going to spend the next 3 years building the intellectual infrastructure for a different kind of politics. Mark has mentioned, you know, the 4 goals that have risen to the top. We are in the process of organizing working groups to deal with each one of those. Working groups involving elected officials on both sides, involving state and local officials as well as federal officials, involving members of the private sector, policy experts, and we are going to model in these working groups the kind of serious conversation about the issues that matter most that has been conspicuous by its absence in Washington, D.C. in recent years. And we are going to spend the next year plus coming up with a menu of good ideas in each one of those areas. And then in 2015 and 2016, above and beyond whatever may or may not happen in the Congress of the United States, we are going to do our very best to infuse the results of these bipartisan deliberations into the presidential contest. We will be dealing with presidential campaigns and candidates on both sides of the aisle, regardless of party. We are convinced that there is a huge political market out there for a politics of problem solving. And Mark's survey, I think, underscores that point. And so the question is not whether we want a new kind of politics that reunifies the country. The question is how to do it. And we're convinced that this agenda And this kind of serious bipartisan conversation is the missing how that the people want.
So I've got one question before we get to the audience. You were a governor of the state, so you had to provide executive leadership in this direction. And, you know, I'm not saying that you should run for president, although give me a little smile if you've ever thought about it.
I saw that.
But anyway, as an executive, what is your role in this whole debate?
Well, the best definition I've ever heard of a leader is a dealer in hope. If a leader can't give you hope, and they can't deal in hope, you've got no leader. And that's the problem. And so a leader is a dealer in hope. And that was a 12-year-old girl that gave me that definition in a grade school. And I've used it ever since. When I was governor, we tried to find commonality. I could never get groups together. I'd go in a room, and I would never go in a group. And when people would say, well, we got a problem, and so, this group wants to meet with you. And I said, what's the problem? They said, well, this group's mad at this group. And I said, bring them both in. So I never would meet with one by themselves. And I walked in the room and said, what do we agree on? They said, hell, we don't agree on anything. That's why we're here. And I said, come on, tell me something. Ball game last night, kids going to, tell me something you agree on. And you'd be surprised. Once you got them to just say, well, that was a pretty good game last night. We did, you know, we're glad the team won, this and that. And you get them to start talking, you break the ice, and you get things moving. There's a thing called vision shared. We use vision shared. Nancy and I have talked about this, and shared vision, whatever you want to call it. But in West Virginia, we had labor fighting business all the time. It was always them against us, us against them, depending on what side you thought you were on. And when we found out that we shared the same vision, what we wanted for our state was the same. Might be coming at it differently, but we wanted the same thing. We had a thing called workers' comp. Workers' comp was horrible in our state. I became governor, it was our Achilles heel. Couldn't get anybody to come to the state and invest and take on the liability because we had a captive system. And I couldn't get anybody that was there to expand. They took on more liability, the more people they hired. So I said, we got to change it. Labor says, Joe, we can't change that. That's always been our ballywick. And I said, are you proud of what you have? I said, let me tell you as your friend, you're going to have to defend this. You've got a program right now that basically people don't get a check for 62 days. That's how inefficient the system is. Only half the people get their phone calls answered. It takes 45 days to see a doctor. So if you think you're helping your brothers and sisters in the workforce that legitimately got hurt and need help, they're not getting it. That's what you're going to have to defend. You want to do that? And they said, we can't be for it. And I said, I'm not asking you to be for it. I know you can't go out. I can't take on you and the trial lawyers. I can beat one of you. I can't beat both of you. And I've got to find out where you're going to be if we're going to move the state forward. They helped me by setting on the side. We moved forward on that issue, and our state took off like a rocket. During the recession, West Virginia's going this way. We can't even catch our economy. Everything else is going this way because of confidence. So I know what leadership does, but you had to have a vision shared. So wherever our division, whether it's Republicans and Democrats on the political side, but as Mark is saying, people just don't have trust. So find out where the divisions, find commonality, and see if you can share, even though you might have a different idea how to get there, is that where we're going? And once you get people that agree on commonality that that's what we really want, then that's where you go. If you can't even get that, go on to something else, because it'll destroy you. And it's a shame, guys. We're just not, you know. And I'm being respectful. Someone asked me about leadership. I said, I'm not used to this type of leadership. Final thing, my father. Here's leadership, and my father was one of the best. But he said, Joe, and I was a young person. I was working with him, and we had little stores. He said, son, I've seen a lot of statues in my life. I've seen statues of men on horseback leading armies into battle. I've seen philosophers sitting and philosophizing about the world and what it could be. But I'll be damned if I've ever seen a statue of a man sitting on a fence.
That's great.
And when you think about that, that's leadership.
So we'll go to questions now. We got a mic back there. And first question here, if you would identify yourself, keep your question as concise as possible.
Stefan Richter with The Globalist. So I'm trying to pick up on your 4-year idea and get to your point, Dan, where you said, shouldn't we shoot for a utopian world in the end? Can't we all get along? I agree with everything by passport. I'm from Germany, so we know how to do 4-year cycles. The question I have, though, is that the utopian idea that still is behind all this, as much as I love everything you said and we're all eating it up, the United States is trying to run a political experiment that is otherwise unknown in human history. It does not have a political system that is a parliamentary system, and more importantly, regardless of what the details are, nobody here ever has decision-making power for 4 years to be held accountable and so on. All other countries depend on one party or a coalition of parties to have something for 4 years. Then you can have health care, and it can maybe, like you said in the middle, it could be quite decent. Other people will see it. There's progress. But it's a unique experiment, and I don't know anything in human history why this should work.
So I guess the question is, institutionally,
Yeah.
we are set up to have one foot on the brake and one foot on the accelerator at all times. And how can you work in that way? I wonder if...
Well, let me just say very briefly that, somehow with this unique set of institutions, we moved from a tiny country with 4 million people, clinging to the coast of the Atlantic Ocean, to the greatest democracy, I think, that the world has ever seen. And so, I have trouble with the proposition that this vision of government was flawed in its core from the beginning. What we have now, in my opinion, is a mismatch between quasi-parliamentary parties on the one hand and a constitution of divided powers and functions on the other. In the same way that a house divided against itself cannot stand, you cannot have parliamentary parties in our system. Something has to give. And I think that, I think there's going to have to be some give on both sides. At the same time that organizations like No Labels are trying to dissolve this parliamentary two-front war, which was not the way our political, parties functioned when the party system was functioning well. I think we also have to, and I'm just speaking for myself now, not for no Labels, I think we have to think creatively about constitutional level changes that would enable our system to function better given current and likely future political reality.
Like what?
And it was in that context, that I surfaced an idea today in the Wall Street Journal for 4-year House terms synchronized with presidential elections. This is not a new idea. Dwight Eisenhower talked about it, in his memoirs. Lyndon Johnson actually laid out the idea for a constitutional amendment in his 1966 State of the Union address. So I win no award for originality. I'm just trying to think through what reasonable changes would be in these circumstances.
Mark?
Yeah, so interestingly, I mean, with that very question of mine, I do an annual poll with Aspen, and I think 2 or 3 years ago, I don't know, you'll find it on their website, we did a poll taking that position. Well, maybe the public is dissatisfied with the system as it is. Maybe they'd prefer a parliamentary system. Maybe they prefer 4-year congressional terms. And the answer was no. No, in fact, they wanted 2-year terms. Well, it is a democracy. In fact, if anything, they did want, they wanted more power to the people, right? More direct participation, more national referenda. But what's very interesting in that poll was, if you view government like a football game, they don't view government as a long pass on somebody runs 50 yards with the ball. They see it as a scrimmage that people fight through and that every idea should be well tested. And before they move forward, we should be certain about it. And that's the way the system of checks and balances is set up. And interestingly, in that poll, despite the gridlock, despite the lack of optimism and all the pessimism, they reaffirmed they believe in the system for the very reason the system is set up.
Okay.
Let me just say real quick in the state. The difference, I think, sir, that you were mentioning, maybe our form of government, I don't think that the Founding Fathers ever thought that we should run this place from Washington. I really don't. I think the state rights, the 10th Amendment, the Constitution is very strong. Being a former governor, We protect that. And I think that when they say that the states are the laboratories of democracy, that's where the rubber hits the road. The guidelines that were set on the national level basically is fine. It's a guideline it's who we are as Americans. But on the other hand, how we administer that might be different what California does.
But you realize that parliamentary democracies that have very strong federative systems driven out of the states.
Yeah, okay, let's see, right here, this gentleman. Let's get a mic up here. And I think the senator's going to have to leave probably after this, so go ahead.
Thank you. Jonathan Roush of Brookings. Question for Senator Manchin, though, anyone else. You guys are the No Labels Caucus. How big is the No Action Caucus? When I talk to people, as I try to do a lot, who are affiliated with the Tea Party and Freedom Works and Americans for Prosperity and so on, they say they like this. This is great because the more government does, the bigger it gets, and the worse it gets. Gridlock is good, and they actually like this. They want this to continue. How many people are there up there now on the Hill, would you guess, who are basically in that camp?
Satisfied with what's happening now?
Yeah, they like obstruction.
Well, there's enough to basically be successful. When you look at it, I mean, I can't figure out why we're not all embracing, and I will be very respectfully critical of leadership there. Why we don't embrace basically a large deal, a Bull-Simpson type of an approach. There's two things you don't waste: is a crisis and a mandate, and that doesn't come along that often. Whether you're in power, whether you're executive, whoever you are, and you better seize it and grab it and make the change that need to be made and move on. We're not getting that done. We've got people that basically want to starve the beast. I mean, hell, we can't even agree on revenue. What the definition of revenue is? Is the definition of revenue, I raise your tax rate from 35 to 39.6 back. That's revenue. That's real revenue. Because if I lower it from 39.6 to 31, but I close all the offsets, loopholes, and everything, every other part of the tax code, and I generate an extra dollar, and I have dynamic growth that generates more dollars. You're opposed to that too? If you're going to agree on something, say, well, okay, if you do it that way, then can you at least let me have some input how we spend the money towards debt reduction and towards infrastructure? Find something we agree on, and then let's move in that direction. So we've got people want to starve the beast, and basically they're making one hell of their super PACs. You know, their PACs are doing pretty damn well. When they're shooting from the right and shooting from the hard left, they're doing good. You shoot from the middle, Mark will tell you, it's hard to raise money for us in the middle. Yeah. We're gonna fix the finances. Well, whoopsie-doo, that really excites me. Okay, I'm gonna leave you with that. Okay. I gotta go on. I gotta leave you.
Yeah.
My uncle had the best perspective of politics. The best. He'd been a politician all his life. The Kennedys loved him. He traveled with them, everything, and he ran. He was running, and someone said, "Hey Jimmy, how's your campaign going?" "Oh, it's going okay." "How's your finances?" He says, "I'm running this campaign on bullshit and bumper stickers, and I'm running low on bumper stickers." And my God, he had it right.
Okay, all right, okay, see ya. See ya. Okay. Jim Jones, Congressman Jones.
Yeah, why not?
Mike for Jim Jones, right up here. We see him? It's the guy with
Careful there, Dan.
I
We're alike. I want to press Bill or anybody else on the panel on the 4-year term. I was thinking it was the last State of the Union when we were putting together President Johnson's speech. He thought a president should have 1 6-year term. And he also thought the Congress should be on the House should be on 4-year terms. He made it in the State of the Union, got loud applause, and it went absolutely nowhere. Mm-hmm. My question is, what does a 4-year term for a member of Congress do to overcome all these other things, the primaries, the redistricting, the money in politics, et cetera? It seems to me that unless you change those fundamental things, you're going to have the same bozos for 4 years instead of 2.
Well, those of you know, not only is Jim a distinguished member of Congress, but he was Chief of Staff to President Johnson. So, yes.
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. It was, I listened to the entire speech, or I re-listened to it, and it was the biggest applause line by far in the entire speech, and obviously it went nowhere. But I would, I don't want this to turn into a discussion of the four-year term, but that was then and this is now. And back then, I don't need to tell you, with a strong majority of the same party in both houses, plus a president who really knew how to move the levers of congressional power the way few other presidents ever have, gridlock was not the problem. In fact, perhaps we could have used a little bit more of it, a little bit more reflection on some of the elements of the Great Society that didn't work so well. So that's my first answer. But here's my second answer. And I was just talking with Dan about this in the green room. With 2-year terms, there is no space for governing whatsoever. It is the permanent campaign made flesh. It is literally the case that when members of Congress show up right after they've been elected, they are told you've got to start fundraising for your next term immediately. There is no space for governance. Things are a little bit different in the Senate. With 6 years, you don't have to be raising money all the time. And if you look at the trajectory of senatorial fundraising, there's a fallow period for 2 or 3 years where they can actually function, focus if they care to on something else. And there's another consideration, and that is right now, both the president and the House think that they can outweight the other. Right? If you don't like it, suffer gridlock for 2 years, and then maybe things will turn in your favor. Imagine a system in which the president knows the following, and the House knows the same thing. We're either going to have to work together over the next 4 years, or there's going to be gridlock for 4 years. Right? It isn't going to be a midterm where you get a new shuffle of the deck. I've got to believe that would make a positive difference. It would sober people up. 4 years is a long time to waste, although we're doing a pretty good job of it.
Tom Coleman, as a point, former congressman.
I'm sorry that the senator left, because I think this was kind of what he was talking about, but all of you, I think, have a response as well. The paradigm today is big money on the left, big money on the right. We have outside groups we never heard of 5 years ago. Yep. These people up on the Hill are afraid of their shadows. If you're talking about leadership, we also need followship. We don't have either in many cases. So my question is, how is No Labels going to break through all the money that will be spent on both sides of the political spectrum? Are you going to rely on social media to go out and create a grassroots thing to overturn big money? And I mean billions of dollars. When Dan and I and Jim and Bill were in the House, we probably had one fundraiser a year in D.C., at least I did. Yeah. And I think I made $30,000 off of it.
Did you? I only made 7 on mine.
Well, whatever. The point of it is,
you needed a better consultant.
All they do is raise money. They don't know how to legislate. If they had to legislate, they wouldn't know how. So these are big things to overcome, not just inertia, but big money. How do you deal with the big money issue?
Mark, you want to start? And then all of you should respond.
I just think that, well, look, I think that look, I used to say that we spend more on marketing a hamburger than we do on our presidential campaigns, and now we spend more on the presidential campaigns than a hamburger. And so money is here. The Supreme Court has paved the way for more money in politics. And the most important thing to remember is that, and I always tell this about, coming from a research background, that one of the interesting things about focus groups, if you get a focus group of 10 people, and 4 of them are just really strident on the left, and 4 of them are really strident on the right, the 2 people who said nothing really turn out to be the only people who counted. And so never forget that even if there's all this noise everywhere else, the 2 people who count are a growing number of well-educated, even better educated, reading, interested citizens who are really the swing voters, who are more intelligent than we give them credit for. And I think that they are frustrated with the system. They want to see change. They want to see agreement on the goals. Give them some credit. And talk to them. And I think as No Labels and other groups talk to them, free from partisanship, they will reach them, right? And that is the only way to really bring change, regardless of whether there's more money in the system or not.
Even though most of these districts are so one-sided politically, that the so-called two people in the room aren't going to make a whole lot of difference in that primary.
Well, and that's, look, I think a separate problem, as you say, is the congressional redistricting. That's a separate problem. There still are enough swing districts left, despite the best efforts of redistrictors, so that Congress does swing one way or another. Let's remember about the 2-year term. The American voters use that 2-year term because they do typically change Congress when they feel like it. And when there's a strong public mood or wind, it's reflected. And the political system and the two parties have worked to dampen that mood. And if anything, what the public wants is, give me a bigger chance to be heard. Let my votes be heard. And let me tell you, people in Washington, they will stand up and reflect my views to the extent they're not.
Well, I think the question still is, how does No Labels deal with these large problems in the context of all this massive money? Because you're not a PAC, you don't raise money, you know, all these kinds of things.
All that's true.
Yeah,
Ron,
yeah, Ron, go
Look,
ahead.
you can't take on every battle, and obviously, post-Citizens United, I mean, obviously you can't deal with the gusher of money that's coming out of the system. But what you can do is put forward a positive agenda that I think people will coalesce behind. You know, it goes to the gentleman's question over here of, you know, what do you do in a situation where you've got a group of folks who just say no? I mean, if I look at the House Republicans, and I think there are about somewhere between 30 and 40 folks that no matter what, say no. And I think that people are getting tired of the no attitude. There's a reason why Congress's approval rating is at the lowest level it's been. And I look back, and it really irritated me, and this is why I think that we're actually a force for good, of a member that was very close to leadership who said to me, he said, you know, Ron, I think the problem that we have now is that people aren't running to represent their district anymore. They're running to represent either A, the super PAC that's going to fund them, or B, they're afraid of the Tea Party person that's going to take them out in a primary if they don't vote the right way of the conservative group. And so I think what we're doing is we're saying we're not about the Tea Party, we're not about the super PACs, we're about solutions. And I think, believe it or not, just a couple years ago, folks were like, no labels, who is that, what is that? And now, if you look at really the groundswell of support that we've built and the direction I think that we're going, that in the years and the months that are coming, that's the way that you turn the tide on this, from our perspective.
Yeah, Bill.
Well, first of all, there is no direct link between money and political success. And if you don't believe me, spend a few minutes with Karl Rove these days. And there's even a weaker link in higher turnout elections. That, by the way, is an additional argument for House elections synchronized every 4 years with presidential elections. But it's also an argument for what No Labels is proposing to do over the next 3 years. We're going to be developing a national agenda based on input from people on both sides of the aisle. Our plan is to infuse that discussion into the presidential contest on both sides of the aisle. If you have presidential candidates who are running as problem solvers, perhaps with different conceptions of the means to the ends that the American people want, you have a different kind of conversation. One last point. And here I'll put on my political scientist hat for just a minute. I wish it were the case that polarization in Congress could be traced principally to our system of districting, because then there would be a silver bullet solution. But that's simply not true. And the reason it's not true is, and I'm sure you've been reading about this, the American population is sorting itself out in partisan and ideological terms. Now you have to gerrymander to get competitive districts. In the old days, you gerrymandered to eliminate them. And you have people, in part because of political polarization, who don't want to live close to people with whom they fundamentally disagree. And so people who don't like multicultural California go to Idaho. and vice versa. So we have a, we have a demographic problem that's influencing our politics.
Let's see. Yes, right there.
Doyle McManus from the Los Angeles Times. So
Hi,
let
Doyle.
me follow the last two comments with this question. You're not going to raise money. Are you going to endorse? Are you going to recruit challengers in House races to sign up to your tenants and publicize that list? Hypothetically, if the next presidential race pitted a problem solver against an obstructionist, and that's not an impossible outcome of the primaries, would you endorse under those circumstances and in all of those categories? If not, why not?
Would somebody pass the microphone to Nancy
Nancy
Jacobson?
Jacobson.
Okay.
This is a Nancy question.
Nancy, is the founder of the organization, so you ought to answer Doyle's question if you can.
So I don't see that we'll get involved in the presidential race at all. We're going to be for the problem solver candidate. We believe in our polling has shown 97% of the public wants the next president to be a problem solver. We want to be able to work with that person, whoever that person is. And yes, we want to endorse. We have requests for candidates, and our feeling is we'll endorse people that want to be part of this process and join the list of 80. This is in the last several weeks, 80 that are going to work with us to build a national strategic agenda. So if people are willing to be in the room, work with us on it, we want to endorse them.
Okay. Further questions? I want to go back to this question of money for a moment. You said, in answering Tom's question, you said, well, maybe the inference was maybe the money doesn't have the kind of impact that you think it does. I remember Adolph Rupp was the famous basketball coach at the University of Kentucky. I think it was him. It could have been Lombardi. I can't remember who said, if it doesn't matter whether we win or lose, then why do we keep score? Yeah. So I'm wondering if all this massive money doesn't have any impact, why do they keep pouring this massive money into the system?
Well, to some extent, look, for what it's worth, the political science that I read suggests that money matters up to a point. And beyond that point, the law of diminishing returns or even negative returns sets in. Now, obviously, if you can't get your campaign up to that point, then you're going to be at a disadvantage vis-a-vis someone who does. But because it's better to have $3 million than $2 million, it doesn't prove that it's better to have $20 million than $10 million. It's a question of how much you need to get your message out. And beyond that, speaking as a citizen, if I watch political ads, up to a certain point, I'm learning something. Beyond that point, I'm just being annoyed. Mm-hmm. Just being annoyed. There can actually be negative returns to spending political money. I don't, and I'm not living in some sort of academic fairyland either. There is a plateau for money beyond which you're wasting your time raising it and you're antagonizing people spending it.
Mark?
Well, certainly Bill's message of money doesn't buy happiness is an old one. But look, I'd say that, I think that the size and level of political debate in this country is changing. It's changing because there's more money. It's changing because people are they're more educated, they're more interested in issues. The whole landscape of the media is changing so that it's easier for people to facilitate. A group like No Labels wouldn't have existed before. It wouldn't have had hundreds of thousands of followers. It wouldn't have been able to create a space in the problem-solving space. Right? All of these things. It's not just one thing that's happening in isolation. And then I also think that the nature of campaigns, as the resources change, the campaigns change. The TV airwaves get saturated at a certain point, which is really what I think Bill is saying, and then they move to a much bigger ground war. So if you look at campaigns used to be all about organization, then they moved all about TV. Now they're all about TV and organization, right? Because the resources are there to go to an individual person and talk to them and bring them out and have a neighborhood captain again. Yep. And so you're seeing fundamentally an elevation of politics. In fact, you're also seeing the donation structure change too. The headlines are about big donors, but small donors, there was no history of small donations in this country. People even rejected the dollar checkoff, more or less, right? I once did a poll, like 20 years ago, with the DNC donor list. The median age was 75, right? Wow. That's fundamentally changing. People are beginning to participate, give their $5, their $10. Someone can raise money overnight out of a movement. A movement that's not necessarily mainstream can have backing. So let's kind of break the idea that there's just one thing going on here. There's 10 or 15 things going on here that's creating a kind of a new fluidity in the information system here, right? And no labels is right in that space.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions? Well, let's give our panelists a hand. Thank you. Great. Great, thanks. And Nancy, they all have the materials. Okay.